Can you talk to us a little bit about your background in intuitive thinking and decision making?
Sure. So I'm an author and of nonfiction, not fiction. So, I'm very much about like the facts and the data. And that's the way that I've been trained. I think that's the way most of us are trained in this society and in this culture. However, I do feel like my whole life I have been a pretty intuitive person. And, I feel like I can read people pretty quickly. I get a vibe on a situation pretty quickly, but I'm also prone to a lot of second guessing, a lot of anxiety, a lot of thought spirals. So I wanted to learn how to trust my intuition and see if I really am intuitive, which the good news is I am, because we all are, or else you'd be like walking into traffic.
Right. It's an evolutionary adaptation. And what I love about your book is you cite so many of the great philosophers and thinkers from modern day to, William James, who's one of my favorites.
Mhm.
I wanted to start with a line that you wrote and then read just a little bit of a personal experience you had as sort of a jumping off point,
Great.
because I think everybody who is watching or listening will relate to this. Now, you write, and I think this really would be the premise of your book, your body is constantly giving you a running news ticker of feelings based on immediate circumstances. I love that, running news ticker.
Mhm.
You go on to write that you had an interaction or an intuitive alarm went off. It involved someone, you write, who makes me profoundly uncomfortable, where the fallout from our interactions haunts me for days after. It was a situation where there was no right answer, just degrees of bad. I have no intuition on this, I said in a voice memo to my sister. I just feel physically sick. She responded, it actually sounds like you have a ton of intuition on this. Indeed, I did. My throat had constricted, a pit had formed in my stomach, my speaking voice had dropped several octaves to a whisper. I was diminished, but I considered my body's data unreliable. So many of us can relate to this. From the neck
Yeah.
down, my body knew exactly what was going on. But from the neck up, I was spinning out to compute a rational decision I could live with. I let my amygdala search for certainty where there is none. The intuitive decision, the intuitive insight is not always effortless, but it is always worth the effort. So talk to us about this, because we all do this, I think, where our gut immediately says no, no, to a person, a situation, a job, whatever it is. And then our brains try to rationalize why our gut is giving us this clear signal.
Or why we're wrong, right? Or why our gut
Right.
is wrong. Exactly. No, it happens so much. We've been taught since, we were small that there really is one way of knowing, and that is pure rationality. That's the only rational way to make sense of the world. It's the pro con list. And when something contradicts that, it can be very jarring to us. And I think, especially as women or other communities in the world that are marginalized, we're taught also that we are wrong. So if something that our bodies know feels wrong, we're saying, well, no, that just must be me overreacting or something.
Can
We
you
really
talk a
gaslight
little bit
ourselves.
about women in particular? Because when I was reading your book, I was thinking a lot about the gift of fear
Yeah.
and the Brian Koberger case.
Mhm.
And for those listening and watching who didn't hear, I did a deep dive over on the Megyn Kelly show about this case and the girls in that house in particular who were having, in the days and weeks leading up to that crime, gut feelings that something was very wrong, that
Mhm.
somebody had eyes on that house, that somebody was outside that house, that the house was being watched. And it seems as though they overrode them, that as
Yeah.
women we're maybe taught you're overreacting,
Absolutely. And you want to be liked. You don't want to be weird or act strange. And that's a lot of what The Gift of Fear is about by Gavin de Becker,
Mhm.
really trying to reinforce that if you are having some kind of visceral response to a situation, or you do have that sensation of things are off, things are funky, people are watching me, to listen to that and to, not talk yourself out of it, because there's a great deal of wisdom and knowledge that our bodies possess, and it's based on past experience. So in that sense, it is rational. It's based on something. This isn't coming out of nowhere. I love The Gift of Fear, What I will say, my little gripe with that book, though, is that for women, when we talk about intuition in women, it's often in this one context of like, don't get dead, ladies. Here's how to protect yourself. Don't get on the elevator with the creepy man, which is true. That is one important iteration of thinking about intuition. But I think that intuition at its best can be this more expansive engine of creativity and magic. It doesn't just have to be for women staying safe and not getting killed by psychos.
No, of course not. I mean, I think what was brilliant about Gavin de Becker is he took what has historically been sort of dismissed by society as women and in hysterical reactions to situations or things that present subtle threats, to listen to their guts and never sort of minimize that. And your book is very interesting in that way because, you talk about using intuition to save yourself from pain, heartache, bad decisions, but also intuition as leading you to, as who said it? It was William James who called it, quote, the feeling of right direction.
The feeling of right direction. I love that phrase so much. Yes. And, the funny thing about intuition is that it can, save you some heartache in the short term, but it can also give you some hard answers. I think that when we are really clued in with our intuition, we'll sometimes hear things we don't want to hear. This relationship that you've invested so much in is actually not right for you. The career that you've hitched your wagon to no longer is in alignment with who you've grown into. So when we're really honoring that deep voice within us, it can give us some hard news sometimes.
I so relate to this. I talked about this a bit when right before I launched The Nerve. I spoke about how nervous I was. And for the first time in my life, Elizabeth, very first time, I understood, I began having what I can only describe as panic attacks. And it was 2 solid weeks of it. Now, this was a very strange experience of intuition for me because I understood that I was having good anxiety.
Yeah.
It sucked to experience it physically, but I knew in my gut it was good anxiety.
Now,
and I was having healthy
how did you
fear.
know? How did you know? How did it feel different to you?
I think because in my brain and my gut, prior to having those panic attacks, which were, no surprise, happening in close proximity to a launch, something I had never done before, but that I had been so in my brain and in my gut so settled that this was the next right thing for me to do and something I really wanted to do and was looking forward to doing, and another aspect of creativity and having somebody place that amount of trust in me. All of those things were amazing. They were amazing. And so I kind of felt like it was almost healthy to get all of that out of my system. My body was getting rid of it for me before I had to do it.
That makes so much sense. And I think your story really highlights something about intuition is that, it's not this airy fairy thing. It's not always going to be pleasant or easy. It will sometimes push you in a direction that's really challenging. And that doesn't mean that it's wrong. So you can have these feelings of anxiety that are not necessarily trying to stop you or prevent you from something, but they're just attendant because it's actually so right.
Yes. And it feels very counterintuitive, but I think that only really comes with knowing yourself. And that's a lot of hard work.
Sure is.
To that end, I really wanted to talk to you about what I think is what actually is a fairly new phenomenon. We have come to understand that the gut, in medicine, they call the gut the second brain. And there's direct communication constantly between the brain and the gut. Hence the old aphorism, trust your gut, right?
Absolutely.
What we know about Ozempic and the likes of those medications is that they sever that connection between the brain and the gut. Can you talk about this? Because this is never discussed. And I think it's a crime that it's not discussed. The implications for people who are on these GLP-1s, who have that key communication severed now.
I mean, look, I'm not a doctor, so I can't give you real detailed information, but I think that GLP-1s are just one of the many ways in which we are cutting ourselves off from our intuition in the modern world. I think that in order to really get to know your inner voice, what it sounds like,
Mm-hmm.
how it is true, and not some other kind of doppelganger emotion like fear or something.
Mm-hmm.
That does require a little bit of quiet and a little bit of interstitial time. So I think that our reliance on never being able to be still for a minute, on hustle culture, on just picking up the phone, social media, the pings, the dings, the push notifications, all of that. I think that's really severing ourselves from the connection that we have with our intuition. So it's not just the GLP-1s, and I don't honestly know that much. I haven't read that much about it because that communication happens through the vagus nerve. So I'd be
Mm-hmm.
really interested in how that works. But I don't think we understand much about how these things work. So I
There
just
is
think
something,
modern life
yes.
is kind of is doing everything it can to sever you from from your intuition.
Well, you're making great points because, I'll close the loop on the GLP-1s by, I've heard many, many people on them say, and there are many reports of this, that part of what it does in quieting what they call, quote unquote, the food noise
Food
is it
noise.
absence cravings of all kinds, not
Yeah.
just for food, but for shopping, for gambling, for
Mm-hmm.
alcohol, but cravings, I think, are so key to being alive. I can't
Totally.
imagine not ever wanting something. And I can't imagine what that does to the senses and to one's own sense of knowing oneself. And to your point, modern life is we have so many applications for sanding that stuff down,
Mm-hmm.
whether it's through medication, whether it's through the phones, which have become adult pacifiers.
Yes,
If
truly.
you never have to sit with your own thoughts if you have a phone right in front of you.
Mm-hmm.
And you write about having a very similar experience in your book where you have had a lifelong fear of driving and cars. And you really had to sit with yourself and parse out. You used the phrase cleave out, which I loved. Were you having a premonition of imminent disaster as you were about to embark on this trip to a foreign country? Or was it just this fear that had sort of situated itself inside of you? Was that the thing running the show?
Right. So, what you're referring to is a trip that I did end up taking for my friend's
Yes.
birthday, where we were going to drive on highways in Italy. I have a pretty deep and significant phobia of driving on highways due to some past trauma. And for the week before this trip, I was having crazy nightmares of the car like careening off the road. And, at the time I was researching premonitions. So I was like, is this a premonition? What is this? So I had to, yes, cleave is exactly what had to happen. I had to really sit down and think, okay, every time I get into a car, I have this fear. So this seems like more of the same kind of protective mechanism of like, stop, don't go, just don't face your fears. And, looking at this from a lot of different angles too, I write about, as you quoted earlier, the amygdala and its constant seeking for certainty in a very uncertain world. That became and still to this day is an incredibly useful lens on defining for myself, okay, where am I feeling uncertain? Is this about premonitions or intuitions, or is this just looking for certainty? I really want certainty. So when it came down to it, that was a combination of past trauma and doing the certainty seeking we all do. So I went on the trip. I'm so glad I did. I had so much fun. But I think that in our lives, there is all manner of category of thing like this. Do I go to the party? I really don't. I'm getting a weird feeling. Maybe I don't want to go. But is that because I'm going by myself and I don't know anyone there? Or is this something really out of the ordinary and strange? So it really comes down to knowing ourselves, knowing our particular patterns, our patterns of mind, our patterns of thought, our patterns of body. That's huge. Intuition is a hugely embodied experience. So that anxiety you were describing before, does that feel similar or different to the, just deep pattern anxiety we're all used to? Or is this slightly different? These are very subtle distinctions, and they really come from doing the work of just sitting with yourself and getting to know yourself.
Or as you again cite, which I loved, the Gestalt psychologist MO of like, sleep on it.
Totally.
Sleep on it, live with it. You don't have to make the decision right away. Let your subconscious mind, your unconscious mind work on you a bit. It's there to help. It's there to put patterns together that maybe you can't. Stop thinking about it actively. I often find stopping actively thinking about a problem or a quandary guides my intuition right where it should go. And it'll come to
Absolutely.
you like that.
Right. We often don't get intuitions when we're hunched over the desk with a pen and a paper. You get it when you're out on a walk, when you're living in the
Mhm.
world, when you're, in a state of flow. So absolutely. When you don't know what to do, don't do anything. That's good advice.
Yes. And before we get to what I think is one of the most provocative and interesting twinings of ideas, premonitions and intuition and how they inform each other, could you talk a little bit about, you mentioned the amygdala before and sort of searching for patterns and rationality. Can you talk a little bit about what that part of the brain does and the role it plays? And the more that we know about it, how that will help us in our own intuitive thinking and decision making?
Sure. So I'm sure that you've all heard about the amygdala in terms of this ancient subcortical structure of our brain. So meaning the oldest part of the brain where that does fight, flight, freeze. So we always hear like, when we were on the savannah of Africa and a lion would cross your path, this was the part of your brain that like told you what to do
Mhm.
in that minute. So I spoke to some neuroscientists at UNC Chapel Hill, and one of them, Margaret Sheridan, she has theorized that the amygdala does all do those things that are wonderful and keep us alive, but over the hundreds of millions of years of human evolution, it does a little bit more than that. And what she calls the amygdala is our certainty checker. So I think it's kind of our central human predicament, like the existential crisis we all share of being human, that our brains love patterns. We love to know what to expect. We love certainty. And yet our environment is so uncertain. So it's partially our amygdala that's always on the lookout for knowing what to expect. So you know how to get where you're going, but you put it into Google Maps anyway. You text your
Mhm.
friend, you're on the way. We're just doing all these little things to mitigate our uncertainty, to make sure
Mhm.
that we know what's going on. So that uncertainty, I think, is, and I'm not the first person to say this by any means, but that uncertainty is for a lot of us the root cause of our anxiety. We don't like it. We don't know. We want things to be solid. The ground falls out from under our feet all the time, unfortunately. So that itchiness is what makes us anxious. So the next time you're faced with a conundrum of wondering, ooh, I have this funny feeling. What's this actually about? You can ask yourself, what's the role of uncertainty here? Where am I grasping for certainty? And that can show up in lots of different ways. If there's an issue I'm having at work or with a relationship, my tendency is always to like hit send on the email, send the text. I just want it over and done with.
It's so hard not to do that. It's
It's
so
so
hard.
hard.
I call it like you just have to ride out the uncomfortable feelings. Let them go through you. Then you can think. Then you can think clearly.
Absolutely. I have never not regretted sending the email. And yet I
Yeah.
go through this over and over again. We just don't want to sit in that discomfort. We want to feel like things are tied up and, we know what to expect and we know what's going on. But just like you said, if you can just kind of let that metabolize a little bit, you're going to be making much, much better decisions for yourself and for everyone around you.
So we're unfortunately running out of time, but I really wanted to get to this with you because I love what you're writing about in terms of premonitions or somehow psychic connections as really manifestations of intuition.
Mhm.
And my own fairly recent example of this would be my brother told me that the night that our father died, he woke up in the middle of the night at the same time that we know he died. And he just knew that that was it, that he had gone and was at peace with it. But I I was like, that didn't happen to me. Like, and I think I'm a pretty intuitive person. And so can you talk a bit about those? Those are fairly common experiences, though. I've
Yeah.
read about them a lot, but then when it happens to you, it feels almost mystical. But there's got to be some sort of intuition happening there. Can you explain and enlighten?
Absolutely. I mean, there's so many different points of view on what that is. A
Mm-hmm.
materialist, someone completely rational scientist would say, well, that's coincidence. But I think what we find in our own experience and through history is that sometimes these things are a little too specific to be
Mm-hmm.
mere coincidence, right? So I do spend some time with psychics and mediums in this book because what's these people, whether that's an incredibly triggering realm for a lot of people. So whether you believe in psychics or that whole thing, go with God, whatever. But what these people are really good at is reading energy. And they are
Mm-hmm.
really good at knowing what is my energy and what is your energy and what the
Mm-hmm.
boundaries between those things are. So I think that there's actually a lot we can learn from people who are using their intuition at that high level. So the connection between premonition and intuition, I think what my stance on it is to just, play with it and see where it happens. I think that we can learn a lot by looking back at our experiences where we say, shit, I knew so and so was going to call, or I knew this bad thing was going to happen, but I didn't listen to myself. I went anyway, and the bad thing did happen. It ended up happening. So when you look back at those experiences, what was that tipped you off? What was it that made your, hair stand on end? And I think you just start playing with it more. So, and I think keeping it very low stakes, especially in the beginning, is really important. I think people always like to recruit their intuition when it comes to real estate decisions or
Mm-hmm.
relationship decisions or a job.
Mm-hmm.
And those are incredibly high stakes places to be relying only on your gut. So I think in the more day to day decisions, see, just test it out. What train is going to come next? What do you think? And see, how that's showing up for you. A lot of people do get premonitions in dreams. So when you wake up, just jot down what you dreamt about. If you dreamt of someone, text them, let them know. And, maybe something wacky happens to them that day. Who knows? But it can just be a fun kind of way to play with and train your intuition.
Today's show is brought to you by Oxford Natural, home of the all-natural Optimum Day and Optimum Night supplements. If you're trying to lose weight after having a baby, or you're prepping for your wedding, or you're just ready to feel like yourself again, look to Oxford Natural. Thousands of men and women across the USA and the United Kingdom are already doing it. Optimum Day powers you with steady energy, it crushes cravings, and it keeps your metabolism firing all day long. Optimum Night helps you relax, sleep deeply, recover, and keep burning fat while you rest. English soccer legend Michael Owen lost 40 pounds. Robbie, the face of fan network AFTV, dropped over 100 pounds and has worked for plenty of others too. So now it's your turn. Scan the QR code or click the link and grab 70% off your first order with code NERVE. No gimmicks, no needles, just results. Oxford Natural. Let's get to work.